start with the crop report, and then we'll jump into the chart. As we look at the crop report, I think there's one number that everybody's going to be interested in as the harvest progresses, and that is the area harvested. The USDA trimmed 500,000 acres because of the storm in Iowa. I think the question is that enough? Talking to people and reading, I don't know if that's enough or not. There is a fairly good probability that this number will come down. The other thing that might come down is the yield. We may be 2 or 3 bushel an acre a little bit high. So while 2.5 billion bushels is a big carryout, you got to look at the trend. And the crop seems to be shrinking just a little bit. And if we dump another 500,000 acres off and we take our yield down to 175, now we're challenging that 2 billion bushel number. The other thing that the USDA did was decrease usage from August to September. And that's interesting because China continues to buy and there continues to be bigger issues. And the reason that they didn't increase demand from China is because China hadn't formally increased their allotment. The way they do things is a little bit screwy compared to the way we think. But there is a pretty good chance that that number is going to be too low and that we're going to gravitate back towards a higher number. So if these things happen, then this carryout continues to shrink. So a 2.5 billion carryout to a 2, maybe even a little bit lower. The combination of these events, I think what that's telling us is that the downside is probably not extreme at the moment, because it looks like we're going to gravitate more this direction than it does the other direction, which is into a much larger carryout. Absolutely can happen, but it doesn't necessarily need to. All right, now let's look at beans, because even though that these two numbers aren't incredibly bullish, if this happens and the bean carryout continues to decrease because yield drops, then that is very bullish, both beans and corn. And the reason is because of the acreage battle that'll set up in the winter for next year's crop. So if the bean yield comes down because of the drought issues and the poor finish that the crop had, this is identical acreage, this is identical demand. If the bean yield drops and China buys, we're going to go higher because we're going to start trimming our domestic use, because there's no way that we can let stocks to use get too much lower than we are. So all eyes are on soybeans because of this dynamic. So corn in and of itself, it isn't that bullish or bearish. It's probably kind of neutral. But if we start to trim the carryout here and beans drop, then corn starts to become corn's got to decide if it needs to go add acres. So here's your corn chart. This is your daily chart of corn, and the big question is have we gone far enough? Here's the summer high at 363, right? This is the high that we had in July, and we've now closed above that high for 4 days in a row, and we tested it overnight. Overnight, we spiked below it and immediately rebounded. We'll see what happens here today, but as these indicators down here, this is your MACD and this is your force index. It's like an RSI. As they approach their zero lines, this becomes an entry opportunity into support, which was once resistance, and this is also your 200-day moving average right in this area. So this actually becomes an entry point for another push higher, and you would want to risk that down to a close all the way down to about 353. A secondary entry point is all the way down here at this open gap where you might want to enter a position down in here. The point of all that isn't just necessarily say that corn's got to go higher, because it clearly doesn't, right? We have a 2 billion bushel carryout, but the way this is setting up is more bullish than bearish, even with a sell-off all the way back down into the mid 40s. I think that the odds of a much lower corn price are being diminished. And now if we get through the harvest and the yield blows the top off of it, and we harvest all the acreage and we push that 2.5 billion number, then we're probably not going to move a lot from here. But if acres come down, yield comes down, and China keeps buying, then there is definitely room for another push to the upside. I don't know where it might go. 380 seems to be a nice target, and I think there would be a lot of selling at that level. It also looks like basis is strengthening and should continue to strengthen, or at least remain strong for a while. So I don't think there's any real rush to get basis levels sold, at least in Kansas. All right, let's look at beans, because I think this is where all eyes are on. I'm going to spread this out just a little bit, make it easier to see. All right, interesting night, interesting setup here. We've been saying for this is the third week in a row that we've said we're way overbought, right? When you're up for this many days in a row, your indicators are going to be overbought. But it's like we talked last week. These highs back here at 983 that held all summer long have now been broken. And everyone's talking about how we couldn't hold $10. Well, the important level is 980. If we can hold 980, then that becomes really significant support and actually sets us up to continue to work higher without more of a pullback. So overnight, we had kind of a wild night. We came down and tested 985 and immediately bounced. I did the math. We spent less than 15 minutes down in this area last night before buyers started to enter. And it's probably algorithms that started buying that, and this is what they're doing. They're simply buying the top of that range down there. And if we can crawl back above this 998 level, 998, 999, this high is now in play. And if it breaks, then that sets up for an expansion on up into this 1030, 1050 range that we've been talking about. So at the current setup, it's not going to take much more for another round of buying. And honestly, it seems more likely to generate the buying than it does to spark a big sell-off here, because the fundamental dynamic is pretty powerful. It won't go up forever, and it won't go in straight lines, but I don't think that this is a top yet. Notice this is not a reversal here that we had yesterday. There's no reversal action. The only thing negative you can say is that we are overbought, and I have no argument against that. But it's difficult for it to move lower. Now I want to show you something. This is a little bit of homework, and this is a theory. I'm just going to adjust this chart because I need to get higher prices so you can see it. We know that markets like to work in or tend to follow Fibonacci numbers. And we know that when we do a Fibonacci retracement, we typically move between 38% and 65%. So if we think that this retracement, when it happens, is going to both hold this support level and retrace at least 38%, which would be a kind of a normal retracement, then at what point do we have to be in order to make that happen? I'll show you. So this is your 38.2% retracement level. and we need it to stay at 985, which puts your target up here at 1070. So if you're going to retrace 38% and hold this level, then 1070 is a target. You can get there some other ways as well. Excuse me. You can get there other ways as well, but that's kind of a quick back of the napkin math as to where they could push to finish this this move to the upside in order to hold this this level. Another level that it could go to is 950. Remember, 950 is the weekly chart and the weekly resistance that we've been talking about for several weeks. That has held, and that's a big deal. So if we go to this price level, then what is the 61.8% retracement? It's 950. So you can go to this level and retrace all the way back through and test all this support without having a bigger retracement than 61.8% in total. So I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but it makes a lot of sense logically to me if we did push higher and start to challenge these numbers, because it sets it up for a nice setup. Here's your weekly chart, right? Let me take this off of here. Okay, so here's your weekly chart. This is your 950 level that broke and has held. We've now expanded up. We're tracing an inside week to last week, which was generating no signal whatsoever. And 1058 is really the next major resistance level. So with the setup we have, I wouldn't be a bit surprised to see that happen, and it's probably more likely than a move back to 9. So we remain bullish, and I think patience is needed in that market. If beans take that path, I think it's hard for corn to sell off a lot. All right, let's look at wheat, and then we'll be done for the day. Wheat has had this really, really choppy 4 months. We got the move off of the low down here at 921. We rallied up to 490, and now we've sold back off. Wheat is starting to look like a really nice entry point if we can find some support and start to trade a little bit higher above the prior day's high. So if you look at the 3 different markets combined, all 3 of them are potentially setting up to be buys. None of them are showing major signs of reversal and major signs of stress, other than the fact that beans are way overbought, and you would think would correct that at some point. But assuming that they don't fall apart, wheat is starting to look very attractive from a risk reward standpoint. For instance, you can take a long position here and put a stop, 10 cents below, and you've set up for a 10-cent risk for probably a 60, 70-cent gain, or at least 45 or 50. That's pretty attractive, and that's just back inside this range here, betting that it comes and tests it. If it takes the top of that range out, then you've set up for a really nice move in wheat. So we've been waiting for this for a long time. It's very, very close to an entry point, and we're getting to the time of year when wheat tends to find some strength as well. All right, that is everything that I have for you today. Patience on corn. You can see here in the night session, we've actually worked a hook reversal on corn. So stay tuned. If sellers don't emerge, that high is in play today on the corn market. This high is in play on the bean market. Let's look at that one more time. Above here, 1008 is in play. And if those 2 things happen, I'm going to guess that wheat is going to start to challenge the 75 level. So definitely not bearish. We'll see what happens. If you have questions, please reach out. Feel free to call. Happy to help. Happy to work through any issues that you've got. With that, I hope you have a great day, and we'll talk to you next week.